Yeah, Frances has just been so enjoying, I think, working with you in lockdown, and I think you probably, well, it'd be lovely to sort of talk to you about how you got to know her, because I think you guys didn't know each other before, did you?
No, not at all. It was lockdown, and actually I'd had a quite a difficult time because a very close friend had died, and then I got sick, and then a young woman who I know had been attacked by her family, and I took her in, so it was all a bit sort of bleak, really. And I got an email from a friend saying that Susie Orbach and Frances were due to do a talk at the Freud Museum, which had been either cancelled or postponed. And what about filming a conversation between them? So I looked Frances up online, and I really did no research because I thought, well, it'd be quite interesting to go in and just for it to be an adventure. And I just had a sense of her work. That's it. And then Frances sent me the keys to her studio because she was isolating. And my friend Leo, who has a camera, and I just turned up at the studio. And so opened the door and went in, and there was this sort of explosion of colour and energy that was really like a jolt, really. And so on the one hand, there were these paintings that were very, very colourful, and on the other hand, these, which she calls her heads, which are kind of like peeling away the mask of when everything is all right and people look completely kind of distraught, which is a little bit how I think a lot of us were feeling at that time. So it was going in, and I found it, seeing kind of what I feel a lot of people are feeling this time of uncertainty and so on. And on the other hand, this kind of energy, really. So I was immediately kind of drawn in, really, from that point. And it was a lovely way to start, with a
She
great
wasn't
big...
there at all, so she literally sent you the keys. I mean, how amazing, really, to have that experience. Very trusting of her as well, but obviously it's you, so but
Yeah, I mean, I guess there was, I met Susie Orbach a couple of times. We don't know each other well at all, and then we have a mutual friend, so I suppose that was a bit of a sort of, I don't know, insurance for Frances, but I don't think she was thinking that way. We talked on the phone, and I think she just decided to trust me.
yeah.
And it was only afterwards you just think, that was quite a thing to do, because Leo and I were in there and just thinking, I felt like a thief, as if we were sort of sneaking around somewhere we weren't really allowed to be in. And then I called Frances actually from the studio. We spoke, I put her on speakerphone.
Yeah.
And I think very strange for her, because to have somebody looking at something, so obviously paintings are made to be seen and they're public, but the studio is the private space, and to have somebody in there without her there to mediate or seeing how we were going to react, or I suppose I could have been some kind of lunatic that decided to go around smashing things up or stealing all our paintings, I don't know, was, as you say, a great leap of faith, really.
And so you met her on the telephone. So you kind of met her because you met her work and you met her energy before you met her, which is a really extraordinary way, in a way. But I suppose that's, for contemporary artists, I suppose that is how a lot of people encounter the work. They encounter the work before they encounter the person. But it was almost more extreme for you because you had her there on the telephone, in her space. So you're absolutely surrounded by her energy. So when did you actually then meet her physically?
Well, not for about 6 weeks, I think, because so we decided that initially I said, I'll just make you a little 10-minute film, but then it kind of grew as I became more and more interested. And we made a sort of long film in what I felt was the way that she makes her paintings, which is, I mean, there's a lot of, I think she prefers the word struggle to labour, because labour sounds a bit like sort of soldiering on. But it's not that they're easy to make or that there's no kind of craft or endeavour behind them, because there is, but that somehow she does it each time. She sort of leaps into the unknown. She hasn't got a drawing, or they're not figurative paintings. So it somehow has to come from the inside. And that was kind of how I decided to carry on with the film. So I started to meet people who she was suggesting on their doorsteps. We weren't allowed to go into anybody's house, so the only place I actually went into was her studio, but of course she wasn't there. So gradually sort of began to kind of build up a picture of who she was through these people who knew her. So it was very interesting as a filmmaker. It's not, normally you'd research things and you do things in a much more conventional way, but it was such a crazy time that making work in that way seemed to make perfect sense somehow.
So you got to know her firstly through her absence, through her work, through her energy, and you had this communication over the telephone, and then you got to know her through her friendships and the people who were important to her on their doorsteps. I mean, you couldn't write it, could you? It really is only these sets of circumstances.
It was only through her work, though. But when we go to the National Gallery, you can't meet any of those people really, because they're all dead. So you are encountering them through their work. And
absolutely.
I guess with painting, I love looking at paintings. So in that sense, she was lucky that the person who had suggested somebody who actually loves paintings, even though I haven't got a track record making films about art at all, and it's always an encounter, isn't it, that somehow the painting comes towards you and you move towards it, and if you can't move, the painting is just on the wall and it says nothing,
Absolutely.
Somehow something happens. It's a kind of conversation with the work as well as with the artist. And Frances was initially very resistant to the idea that her work had any meaning at all. So she kept saying, it doesn't mean anything, it's just paint. And you just think, oh, these are very powerful paintings, of course they mean something. But she wasn't prepared to go along with that for a long time. Actually, it took a long time before she actually trusted me, to somehow, there's no easy connection between somebody's life and their history and the way they make work. It's a lot of people have experiences of, she had a very overbearing, quite sadistic father, but many people have them. And they're not artists and they don't make work, but somehow it kind of informs the work that you do, the life that you have. And I was particularly interested in the fact that she's a woman, and that she graduated at the time of the YBAs, when painting wasn't fashionable, I suppose, and it's never easy to be a woman artist. It's not easy to take yourself seriously, and it's not easy for other people to take you seriously. So I have really huge admiration for her, that she's kind of persevered, in that context.
Absolutely. I get the impression that it's not only is it a vocation, it has to be for Frances. She could not be anything other than a painter. And I think it was in the video with Susie where she says, she just inhabits the world of paint. It's on her taps, it's on everything, and she sees the world through paint. It's a very sort of physical relationship, and I think that comes out through her painting. And it's interesting what you're saying about, not wanting to have her work interpreted or sort of talk about it in that way at all, because I think there is so much that could be inferred when you look at it, especially with the heads. And I think that it was the painting which was called Smile, which intrigued you. And it is an intriguing work, and in particular the way Frances talks about the fact that it just emerged. It wasn't a preconceived idea.
No, I was really surprised, because I think usually, certainly, but with the drawing is what it is, and she can't layer it and keep changing it. But when she talked about Smiles, she said that it was initially going to be an abstract painting, and then something else emerged out of it. And that, I suppose, with any kind of creative project, there's some terror involved. I mean, she doesn't talk about that, but I certainly feel it, because if you're going into somewhere and you don't know what you're doing, it's really frightening. I mean, even saying that now, I get chills up the back of my legs, because, you know, what are you really doing?
I completely agree that it does look terrifying, but, you know, she seems in a way up for the challenge. You know, I think that's what's really impressive. It's like she's up for the challenge day in, day out, and it must be exhausting. I mean, that's my feeling. I think, you know, she puts clearly so much energy and commitment into every single work. And I loved the sort of the last line of your short film where you said you got her, you know, sort of sitting in that chair, and she says, you know, if you get stuck, you're going to get stuck at the same point. And I thought that was very interesting. And, you know, you can't just like step away, you've got to fight your way out of it.
Yeah.
And that made me think, you know, I suppose, you know, I'm almost answering my question, but what can we learn, you know, from Frances and her work? I thought it would be quite interesting to have your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it is that, you know, that, I mean, particularly for women, and you know, a lot of young women sometimes, you know, approach me and say, how do you get to be a filmmaker or an artist? And actually you have to do it. Yeah. and that sounds incredibly simplistic, and of course it is, you know, but it's like really giving yourself that permission to go into that space and make the work. And that's all you have, really, because if you're sort of depending on somebody coming along and saying, oh, you're very good at what you do, you know, why don't you paint, why don't you do this, why don't you, and somehow then that permission is going to make it possible for you to make work, you're never going to do it. It has to kind of come from the inside. And that sort of compulsion that Frances has. And also to make those huge paintings. So we went in the last time, and there's this, wow, it's really blown away, absolutely fantastic 6.5 foot painting. And you think she's making that painting and there isn't a market for it at the moment, as far as I can see, you know. And so much of kind of contemporary art has been commodified to within an inch of its life, to where it becomes completely empty. And her work is not about that, you know, it is about the work. And I really hope that she finds, you know, that it finds its place in the world. I'm sure it will. But actually to make it without thinking in that way, you know, it's how am I going to make money out of it? Or who's going to like this? Or is it going to fit on someone's wall? Or does it fit in with their sofas or whatever? I think that's really brave. And I think courage is the main thing, really. Absolutely. Even though she's a very fearful person, you know, she's very afraid of the virus and so on, you know, so that fearfulness is balanced by this sort of enormous courage, I think.
I think that's very insightful, actually. Yeah, she has been, I don't think she'll be ashamed to admit, she was very scared at the beginning of lockdown, and she says so in the film. She was frightened, you know, and quite rightly, you know, it was a frightening time. I think a lot of us didn't know what we were facing, but then she's also courageous, and I think the work shows an enormous sense of courage. And that's in particular why I wanted to show some of the really large works in this exhibition, because I felt like they, you know, stood up to who she is as an artist, and that they needed to be seen. Redhead in particular actually wouldn't get into the gallery, it's in the catalogue. And the other work had to be hoisted up on the outside and come in through the window. We do like a challenge. But again, I felt like it was really important that they're seen, and that we, again, don't commodify it, even though we are a commercial gallery and we wanted people to obviously buy her work, but we wanted people to see, you know, the real Frances, you know. And I think that's also what's been so wonderful about, you know, you going in there with the videos, it's given us a new insight to Frances, and at quite a vulnerable time. But also it's a sort of story of overcoming your fears, because I think through lockdown she grew, didn't she, and became more fearless and found more solace through her work. So I don't know if you have been back or noticed a change from sort of the first time you met her, if you've been back into the studio more recently.
Well, I think the last time I went was when we made the little Fragmented the gallery show, and there was all this new work there, and it did feel like there had been this kind of new surge of ideas, really. And I think one of the things, sorry to go back to the show, that really surprised me is the gallery is small.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, how are these big paintings going to look in this small space? And actually they looked amazing. And that really surprised me, because actually they're big, but somehow, you know, Smile is a really big painting on a wall with some other things around it. And somehow it didn't unbalance the room at all. So I can't really explain how that happened.
Well, we just put Smile next to Night, so we just had the two sort of equally powerful but different palettes, I suppose. So they didn't compete with each other, but they stood up to each other, and I think that was kind of the concept there. And then we had the more minimal, the drawings, which I love, actually, because she says with the drawings so much with so little, and I think they're really very special. And so we had those across another wall in the gallery, so it was trying to get the balance. But I think, I mean, if we can talk about the drawings a little bit, I love the way she you know, they're so minimalist again, and it's about sort of stopping and not putting too much in. And they're so opposite to the paintings, not that she puts too much in, but with the paintings there's more of a fight, whereas I feel like with the drawings, I don't know, maybe she kind of is freer and somehow happy just to have to let go. I don't know, what's your perception?
So she says she has a very high failure rate with the drawings.
Yeah.
And what I think that means is that she has to throw a lot of them away, because either they work or they don't. You can't just carry on, you know, like with the paintings with Night. It's about the ghosts of other paintings that kind of didn't work, and that she was then layering up until finally she got something that looks as if it was just made like that, but actually took a very long time. And there was I think with the paintings, it's really catching something quite ephemeral and just being there in that moment of kind of grace, really. And I think on each side of each drawing, it's probably a lot of drawings that haven't worked.
I think it's definitely got to be challenging. You know, when Frances in the video was saying how, I think it was an argument with Susie about if work looks too nice, she's not interested at all. And she was quite cross about that. But I could see both sides of the argument. I think, but you definitely do want something challenging.
Definitely, because I think otherwise we're just sort of skimming around on the surface, and that somehow when you're confronted with things that are painful and difficult, there's something deeply kind of reassuring about that, because you think, I'm not the only person that feels these things. And so I feel that I'm part of a community of people who are not just enjoying the lovely things in life, which of course we do, but also being able to look at things that are really difficult, and as she says, fight your way out of it. She paints in a very kind of confrontational and challenging way, but she paints like a bloke, because she's not directly autobiographical. You know, she's not talking about periods and abortions and relationships and things, and it's fine that some women artists do that, and it's great to see them. I remember being very moved by Mary Kelly many, many years ago, you know, having her son's nappies on the wall and thinking, yeah, make art out of the everyday and about our lives in a way that is meaningful and can live in a gallery context and can have that kind of conversation. But I think with Frances, it's not what she's doing. And I think that makes it harder for her as well, because she's kind of painting like a man, you know. And
debunking the gender, totally. I mean, I think, you know, her work's very much like Frank Albert. You know, it's unusual to see a woman working in that way, but it's not about being feminine. It's about, you know, this interaction with the paint and with the sort of visceral qualities of it, and having that kind of daily kind of fight with it in a good way, which we perhaps more associate with a male painter than a female painter to this point.
Scale as well. It's not kind of, let me just do this at my kitchen table. I mean, she's lucky, she always says that, you know, that she has a big studio and she has, you know, the resources to make big paintings, but that's what she does. And I find that, again, it's great to see women doing those things.
It's brave and ambitious and all the things that we want for the future, isn't it?